My husband never let me sign a single document in our marriage. Not one. Not the lease on our first apartment, not the car loan, not the life insurance forms, not even the paperwork when we refinanced the house 3 years ago. He always had an explanation ready before I could ask. "I'll handle it, babe. You're swamped with work. It's just boring legal stuff." And I believed him. Every single time. I believed him because that's what you do when you love someone. You trust them with the boring stuff. It was our 8th anniversary when everything fell apart. I met my husband at a friend's birthday party in Austin when I was 26. He was the kind of man who filled a room without trying. Tall, confident, the sort of person who remembered everyone's name after meeting them once. I was a graphic designer freelancing out of my apartment, eating cereal for dinner 3 nights a week, convinced I was doing fine. He had his own small commercial real estate firm. He wore a nice watch. He remembered I'd mentioned liking a particular coffee shop on our second date and showed up the following week with a bag of their beans. I was done for. We dated for 2 years. He was attentive, thoughtful, decisive. He made plans and followed through on them. After years of dating men who couldn't commit to choosing a restaurant, that felt like oxygen. We got engaged on a trip to Sedona. I called my mom from the trail and she cried. I cried. It was everything I'd imagined. We married in the fall. I moved into his house. Technically our house now, he said, though I never thought much about the fact that the deed still sat in his name alone from when he'd bought it as a bachelor. There was always something else to focus on. The wedding. Then the job I took at a small branding agency downtown. Then the miscarriage we didn't talk about enough. Then the pregnancy that worked, and then our daughter was born, and suddenly we were parents, and the whole world reorganized itself around her small, sleeping face. He handled all of it. The finances, the insurance, the accounts. He set up the joint checking account, but managed it through an app on his phone that I never downloaded because he said he'd give me updates every month. And he did, mostly, in the form of "we're good," or "might want to hold off on anything big this month." I trusted him. I trusted him the way you trust your own heartbeat, automatically, without examination. The first time I noticed something was off wasn't dramatic. There was no ominous music. I was 33 years old, standing in our kitchen in yoga pants, trying to add our daughter to my health insurance plan through my employer's online portal, a routine thing. The form asked for our address, and I typed it in automatically. Then it asked for the property owner's name for proof of residence purposes. I figured I'd just pull up a utility bill or something, and I went digging through the folder in the filing cabinet where we kept important papers. He wasn't home. He was at a conference in Dallas. I found the utility bills easily enough. But when I flipped past them, I saw something that made me stop. The mortgage statement. His name only. Fine, I already knew that. He'd bought the place before we met. But below it was a refinancing document from 3 years ago. I remembered that refinancing. I remembered him saying we were getting a better rate, that it would save us almost $200 a month, that he'd take care of all the paperwork. I had been grateful. I had been grateful. I had said thank you. My name wasn't on it. I stood there for a moment, telling myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe there was a reason. Maybe it was easier legally. I put the folder back and finished the insurance form with a utility bill and told myself I was being paranoid. But something had shifted, like a pebble in your shoe that you can't stop feeling. I didn't bring it up right away. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. But honestly, I think I was afraid of what the right moment might reveal. Instead, I started paying attention in a way I never had before. I noticed that every tax return we filed jointly, I knew that much, was signed digitally through a service he managed. I'd always just e-signed wherever he sent me a link without reading the full documents. I noticed that our car, the one I drove every day to take our daughter to preschool, was registered in his name. Again, he bought it before we married. But we'd talked about transferring it. He'd said he'd handle it. I noticed that the savings account he mentioned periodically, the one he said he'd been building for our daughter's college fund, wasn't listed anywhere I could find in our shared paperwork. When I asked about it once, casually, he said it was under his business accounts for tax optimization purposes, and I'd nodded like I understood. because I didn't want to seem stupid about money, which in retrospect was exactly what he was counting on. I started writing things down, not because I thought I was building a case. That idea would have horrified me then. I just needed to see it on paper to understand if I was losing my mind. The list got long faster than I expected. Car, his name. House, his name. Refinancing. I thought we'd done together, his name. Refinancing. I thought we'd done together, his name. Investment account, his name. I confirmed this through a statement I found at the bottom of a drawer. Business accounts, his name. Life insurance policy, the one I knew existed because I remembered him mentioning he'd updated his beneficiaries after we married. I couldn't find it anywhere. I found it eventually, or rather, I found a premium payment notification on an old email account of his that he'd accidentally stayed logged into on our shared laptop. The beneficiary wasn't me. I want to be careful about how I describe the next few hours, because when I tell this story now, people expect me to say I fell apart. I didn't. Something cold and very clear moved through me instead. I sat at the kitchen table while our daughter napped upstairs, and I just thought, slowly and carefully, the way you think when you already know the answer and you're just waiting for yourself to admit it. He had been building something for 8 years, quietly, patiently, with the same confidence and follow-through that had made me fall in love with him. Every time he'd said I'll handle it, he'd meant it. He had handled it. He'd handled it so completely that I had nothing. On paper, in the eyes of every institution that mattered, bank, county recorder's office, insurance company, I was a guest in my own marriage. My name was on our daughter's birth certificate and our joint checking account, which held whatever he chose to put in it each month. That was it. The beneficiary on the life insurance policy was a woman I didn't recognize. The policy had been taken out 4 years into our marriage. He had told me, I remembered this clearly now, that he'd updated everything after we got married. That had been a lie specific enough to require intention. I looked her up. She wasn't hard to find. Her name was on the policy document, and there aren't that many people with that exact name in the Austin metro area. She had a LinkedIn profile. She worked in property management. She was about 40. And then I found, through a combination of public records and 30 minutes of focused searching, that she was the co-signer on a property he owned in Round Rock, a rental property I had never heard of. I closed the laptop. I went upstairs and watched my daughter sleep for a while. Then I called a lawyer. The lawyer I found specialized in family law with an emphasis on financial abuse within marriages. I hadn't even known that was a specialty. She was calm and methodical, and she didn't flinch at anything I told her, which helped me not flinch either. She explained some things to me that I am still, years later, furious that no one teaches women before they get married. She told me that in Texas, property acquired before marriage generally remains separate property, but that assets built during the marriage, including appreciation and certain commingled funds, can be subject to community property claims. She told me that a spouse deliberately structuring finances to exclude the other party is a recognized pattern. She told me that the lack of my name on documents didn't necessarily mean I had no claim, but that it would complicate things significantly and that he had likely known that. She asked if I had access to financial records. I told her about the shared laptop, the email account he'd stayed logged into, the mortgage statements in the filing cabinet. She told me to make copies of everything I could access legally, anything in shared spaces, shared accounts, places I had normal access to as a resident of the home. She was very precise about the word legally. I appreciated that. I spent 2 days while he was still in Dallas going through everything methodically. I found the rental property documentation. I found records of a separate LLC he'd formed 6 years ago, 1 year into our marriage, through which he appeared to be running income from the rental. I found emails referencing 2 other investment properties I hadn't known about. I found correspondence with the woman from the insurance policy that was professional but oddly intimate in that way that emails between people who know each other well sometimes are, references to conversations clearly had in person, shorthand that assumed shared context. I don't know the exact nature of their relationship, and ultimately it didn't matter as much as the financial picture did. What mattered was the architecture of what he'd built, a separate financial life running parallel to ours for most of our marriage, structured so that if we ever split, or if he died. I would have very little. I made copies of everything. I put them somewhere he couldn't access. Then I called my mom. My mom arrived the next morning with a casserole and the kind of quiet fury that only mothers of daughters who have been wronged can produce. She sat at my kitchen table and listened to everything, and when I was done, she said, very simply, "What do you need me to do?" I needed her to take my daughter for a few weeks while I figured out next steps. She did, without question. My dad called that evening. He's not a man of many words, but he said, "You did right by calling the lawyer first. Keep going." That was enough. When my husband came home from Dallas, I was calm. I had practiced being calm. My lawyer had advised me not to confront him yet, to continue gathering information. But there was one thing I needed to know that I couldn't find in any document. I needed to know if he was going to lie to my face. We had dinner. He asked about our daughter. I told him she was with my parents for a few days, that they'd wanted some grandparent time. He didn't question it. We talked about his conference. He was relaxed, normal, present in that particular way he had, attentive, engaged, the man I had married. I asked him, conversationally, if he'd ever thought about adding my name to the house. He said he'd been meaning to look into that it was on his list, that he'd handle it. He looked me right in the eye when he said it. I slept in the guest room that night for the first time in our marriage, and I lay there in the dark, understanding something I should probably have understood sooner. The man I loved and the man I had married had never been fully the same person. The legal process took 14 months. I won't walk through all of it because some of it was genuinely boring in the way that legal proceedings are. Lots of document requests and depositions and waiting. But a few things are worth saying. My lawyer's forensic accountant found over the course of discovery that my husband had been systematically underreporting the income from his rental properties in a way that affected our joint tax filings. This was a separate problem for him beyond our divorce, one that involved conversations with people whose letterheads I did not enjoy seeing. He retained a tax attorney in addition to his divorce attorney. The bills added up. The woman from the insurance policy. I learned more about her during the process than I ever expected to. She and my husband had known each other for nearly 10 years, longer than he and I had been together. Their relationship was complicated in ways that came out in discovery. She was a co-investor in his properties, a business partner in the most technical sense. And yes, also more than that at points. Though he denied the personal dimension until evidence made denial impractical, she had not known about all of his financial structuring. She became, somewhat surprisingly, a cooperative witness when my legal team subpoenaed her records, because some of what he'd done had disadvantaged her as well. My husband had a tendency to solve problems by excluding people from information they needed to make fair decisions. He'd done it to me. He'd done it to her. He'd done it to a business partner in a deal from years before I met him, which came out when my lawyer pulled certain public court records. It was a pattern. Long before I arrived, it was a pattern. In the end, the court recognized my community property interest in the marital home, in the appreciated value of his business during our marriage, and in a portion of the investment income that had been run through the LLC during our marriage. It wasn't everything. It wasn't simple. But it was enough to start over with real footing underneath me, which is more than he planned for me to have. The life insurance policy was changed as part of the settlement negotiations. He was required to maintain a policy naming our daughter as beneficiary until she turns 25. That part I fought hard for, and I won it. My daughter is 5 now. She has her father's confidence and my stubbornness, which I've decided to treat as a feature rather than a bug. She sees him on his scheduled weekends. She loves him, and I don't interfere with that, because he is her father, and whatever he did to me is a separate thing from who he is to her. I've made my peace with holding both of those truths at the same time. There are things I know now that I didn't know at 26, at 30, even at 33, standing in my kitchen with a mortgage statement in my hand. I know that love and trust are not the same thing, and that trust should be built on evidence, not on the feeling of safety someone makes you feel. I know the financial literacy is not optional, and that "I'll handle it" is a sentence worth examining every single time you hear it, regardless of who's saying it. I know that asking questions about your own money, your own home, your own name on your own documents, is not paranoid or difficult or ungrateful. It is the most basic form of self-respect. I know that the version of me who handed a man the entire administrative structure of her life because he seemed competent and confident and she was tired, I understand her. I don't blame her. But I am not her anymore. I have an LLC of my own now. My name is on my house. I have a financial advisor I chose myself and speak with quarterly. When someone says they'll handle something that affects my life, I say, "That's great. Can you walk me through it when it's done?" Every time. Without apology. My mom came over last spring and we sat on my back porch and she looked around at the yard, the raised garden beds I'd put in, the new fence, the little solar lights along the path, and she said, "You made something real here. I have. I really have. And no one else has the deed to it." I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this ended, not in a mystical way, just in the plain, observable way that choices compound over time until they become a life you either chose or didn't. My husband made choices for 8 years, small ones and large ones, each one adding a brick to something I wasn't allowed to see. And I made choices too. The choice to trust without verifying. The choice to feel grateful instead of curious. The choice to believe that love and good intentions were the same thing as honesty. They aren't. I know that now, the way I know my own name. What my husband built wasn't evil in a cartoonish sense. He wasn't a villain in a movie. He was a man who had decided, somewhere along the way, that protecting his own interests was more important than being truthful with the person he'd promised to protect. He was disciplined about it. Patient. He used the qualities I admired most in him, his follow-through, his competence, his calm, to build something that would have left me with almost nothing if I hadn't gone looking through that filing cabinet on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. That's the part that stays with me. There was no dramatic moment that tipped me off, no single red flag I'd been ignoring for years. It was a routine insurance form, a name on a document, a question I almost didn't think to ask. The distance between the life I almost had and the life I actually built for myself comes down to one afternoon when I happened to keep looking instead of closing the drawer. I don't say that to suggest I was lucky. I say it because intelligence isn't always about being the smartest person in the room. Sometimes it's about being willing to look at something uncomfortable and not flinch. It's about asking the second question when the first answer feels a little too smooth. I wasn't stupid when I trusted him. I was choosing to extend grace. But there is a version of grace that serves love, and a version that just serves someone else's agenda. Learning the difference is hard and it costs something, and there is no shortcut around that cost. What I'm proud of, genuinely proud of in a way I don't say out loud very often, is what I did once I knew. I didn't panic. I didn't confront him from a place of rage and give him time to cover his tracks. I got quiet, and I got organized, and I got a lawyer, and I protected my daughter first. That's not something that came naturally to me. I'm a person who cries at commercials and apologizes when strangers bump into me. But I found something underneath all of that when I needed it. A kind of cold, clear-eyed determination I didn't know I had. That's what the story is really about, I think. Not about him. Not about betrayal. It's about finding out what you're actually made of when the floor drops out. It's about the fact that resilience isn't a personality trait some people have and others don't. It's a decision you make when you're sitting at your own kitchen table at 33 years old with a mortgage statement in your hand, and everything you thought was solid suddenly isn't. My name is on my house now. That matters. But what matters more is understanding exactly how it got there